All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for coming to another Reltio community show. I'm Chris Detzel, and it's been a few weeks since we've had one of these shows. I was on vacation, so we won't talk about a lot of that, but it was a lot of fun. But today's show, Chris Iloff has come back and he's doing a kind of a part two on the topic around democratizing data governance through master data management. Um, so Chris, I'm really excited about this. Next slide.
Okay. If it lets me shift. Hang on. There we go.
So the rules of the show, as usual, is keep yourself on mute. All questions should be asked in chat, or feel free to take yourself off mute and ask there. The show will be recorded and posted to the community in the next day or two. Once I have it, I will also send an email directly to everyone that RSVP'd and or showed up. Next slide. So upcoming shows, now some are in the works, but the three um, that are upcoming is the one today. And then the next one will be next week. Ask Me Anything about Reltio's automated householding feature. So we had lots and lots of questions around that feature. So we'll have the expert come in and answer those questions, and then live have you ask questions again or more questions that you might have. And then on the 20th of September, we have a show called MDM as the launching pad for data governance, journeys and value quantification. So that's going to be really interesting. One of our partners from ZS, actually two people from there, will be hosting that particular show, which I'm really excited that some of our partners are starting to engage in our community in that way. Next slide. And then, hey, we have a conference that we are sponsoring in a big way called Data Driven. It's on October 4th and 5th. You can sign up. Now we have some specials that are going on right now. So if you want $100 off, shoot me a note, and or it's probably in your email if you haven't got it. Let me know. We'd love to have you. We have some great speakers from real life case studies and things like that. So lots of really uh, good speakers and things like that. So we hope that you can come to Dallas. It's really hot, but maybe it won't be as hot in October for that. So I think that's it for me, Chris. I'm going to let you kick it off.
All right. Well, probably met some of you or many of you on the previous webinars we've done. And as Chris mentioned, we did kind of a precursor to this, right, around MDM being a great, nursery or really a breeding ground for data governance, a way for you to grow that data governance from the ground up. We're going to dive a little bit into that today. And really what we're going to talk about is how you build more modern data governance frameworks, or perhaps augment your existing one to bring that forward into the age of data products and data mesh and modern data management. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about the how-tos and things you can do to build that out and ways to execute. So real quick agenda. We're going to zip through these. Please, if you have questions, as Chris said, throw them in the chat. He's going to interrupt me. That's fine. It's important you get the most out of this, and your questions help you get the most out of this. We're just going to do a recap real quick on the previous one so they dovetail together. Do a quick kind of overview of a data governance framework, and then high level some of the steps of working through that framework to build it out from your MDM perspective, kind of from that MDM hub outward. And we're going to go through the details of each of those steps. We've only got 45 minutes, so we'll probably fly through some of these slides. Again, the big takeaway from the previous one is really to make sure that we're still understanding a lot of the synergies and parallels between an MDM practice and a data governance practice, right? And how these tend to grow in very similar ways, right? They evolve as practices, not necessarily technology solutions. That's a big part of it. When we evolve MDM, we have an opportunity to activate a lot of data governance, right? To make sure policies are actually being enforced and standards are activated, right? To make actual governance happen. We can do that through MDM through a lot of the capabilities that come through MDM platforms like Reltio. We talked about some of that in the past as well. And then lastly, something that we didn't dive into too much before, we're really going to dive into today is how well your master data management practice just naturally aligns to a federated data governance approach, or what we call, democratized data governance today, about getting the data products back out into the hands of the people, and helping them navigate what it means to manage and govern those assets. So we look at how MDM is just out of the box, from a perspective, from a understanding and a theory, from a construct, how it all really dovetails and fits really, really nicely with the federated data governance. And that's what we're going to walk through today, are some of those, ways that you can actually make that happen. Not previously, we kind of talked about the what and drew some outlines and made some connections. Now we're going to dive into it a little bit to let you know what are some ways that you can actually start to build this out yourselves. So to start with, we'll just go over the kind of a common data governance framework. Now, most likely, most of you already have a data governance framework in place. Maybe you don't. Sometimes you don't. I know, when I did MDM way back a long time ago, we didn't, unfortunately, and that made things definitely a lot harder. So if you have one in place, some of the things we're going to talk about today and these steps will still work, right? They're ways that you can integrate yourself into the existing framework and start to help augment that framework to make it a little bit more modern, as needed, and get yourself involved from an MDM perspective as contributors, and really major contributors to a data governance practice, right? There's many frameworks, right? So you can go Google this, you'll find lots of opinions and lots of different words and verbs used. But at the end of the day, data governance is really about ensuring the usability, accessibility, availability, integrity, and security of your data in the organization, right? And that's those goals, those objectives are key to any data governance program. It really doesn't change. When we look at frameworks, we really see pretty much the same thing. It's really based in people, process, and technology. And the uniqueness across the frameworks is really more, how do we compartmentalize people, process, and technology in a way that, aligns to our understanding or even our organization, right? So yeah, you'll see that really when you boil it down, it's people, process, and technology as the nuts and bolts of it. But we use different words, synonyms, and things like that to describe how we categorize those things a little more clearly, instead of something so high level as people, process, and technology. This is an example of what we have here. This is data governance in the framework as we define it here for Reltio. These steps to federate and these steps definitely apply. We are actually in the process of re-looking and reinvesting and redoing some aspects of our own data governance, right? So it is highly important, and this is practice stuff that we are actively doing today that I'm sharing with you. So very, very apropos. Probably not a lot of questions on the framework, but strategy drives everything. This is where we have to have a common vision, mission, goals, objectives, and understand any initiatives that we want to partake to expand and manage our overall data governance practice in an organization. You've got the organization itself, right, which is really a construct of people, the structure therein, right, and culture, and how those things allow people really to have to be enabled and empowered to have the decision-making rights that they really need for an effective data governance council. We've got principles, which really these roll up as the policies and the standards and the rules of operating and these kind of things that really kind of give the weight to governance, and usually, quite honestly, are the things that create the tension, right, across an organization when it comes to actually executing a data governance practice. The process is really it's processes around how we even manage and how we execute data governance, but also how we steward the data, how we support decision-making around the data, right? How we process requests and escalations for changes to, anything data related, data definitions, rules on use, access rules, things of that nature. So how do we work through a governance from a process perspective. Technology, we won't get too much into that. You're all here because you own a piece of data management technology that has multiple capabilities, right? And we'll talk to how technology is applied, right, as a tool that supports and helps data governance activate and implement. And then lastly, again, some of the operational stuff here really is around the controls. How do you continuously improve? How do you operate on a daily basis and make sure that your data governance practice is actually really effective? So what do you monitor? What are the KPIs you want to look at? And how do you inform optimizations that could take place in the future? So all of those are really kind of the foundational, posts that support a data governance practice, right? This is the framework that controls operation and methodology and everything. But how do you get there? So this is the key to today's conversation, are really, steps to federate. And we see it kind of through the eyes of these pillars in the framework. So these steps, are fairly sequential. They can operate in parallel. You don't, need to step through them sequentially by any means. But we'll walk through them as ways, again, that kind of align to aspects of the framework that you'll be able to either modify or augment or inform through master data management. We start by identifying and making sure we document, right, the data domains. So we all have understandings across our organizations. We definitely do as MDM owners and practitioners, right, about what data domains we have and what they are and how we define those. You likely already have a lot of those defined. If you have a data governance team, if you have councils and things like that, there's already a clear understanding of data domains. But it's always good to address those and readdress them, make sure that they're still accurate, make sure that your MDM practice is aligned to those. We'll talk through that. We identify products. These are data products, right? And assign domain delegates. So we'll get into a touch here around data products and data supply chain, just to help that conversation. And I think you'll understand this is where we can help put data governance into a modern data governance type of aspect and approach when we start to use the concept of data products here to really help with the federation and help with how we assign ownership of those data products. We got to document and align the policy and standards. So similar, right? You're going to see kind of a theme with these things, right? Of a gap analysis really between your MDM practice, what you have in place today, and what your data governance practice has in place today. Coalescing around the policies and standards that do or don't exist, making sure we create the ones that don't exist, making sure that if ones do exist, that there's a vehicle for MDM to help action those standards and make those policies enforced and real. Similar to document and align stewardship processes, we want to take a look at what it means to be a data steward. Data stewards are, one of our most highly effective roles really in data governance to make data governance achieve its goals, right? Especially around data quality. So we want to look at what those processes are. Are they really well defined, or are we pretty mature there? And then what are we doing from the relative MDM perspective to make sure that we're supporting those processes through MDM workflow? And lastly, we align to the controls. How do we monitor, report, and optimize? There's a lot of great data, a lot of operational metrics, KPIs, a lot of insights that can be gathered from your MDM practice, right? So how do we make sure people see that? How do we inform data governance through operational reporting in MDM? And how can we even use MDM to do some of that distribution of insights and information related to data governance? So at the end of these steps, what you end up with is MDM fully facilitating data governance, right? As well as helping to build out the appropriate teams, right? These logical constructed teams that will be federated across the organization to execute data governance. Any questions before I move into the steps?
I don't see any questions as of yet. So
all right. It's hard on this screen, Chris, sometimes. So to see.
Yeah.
Yep. Hang on. Just trying to edit it. So let's
And
start
if you
with,
want, I can share my screen if that makes it, whatever's easier.
I don't know,
Okay.
it's that I clicked off for a second. So let's start with identifying and documenting data domains. So, we all understand the basics, and I think we kind of align on those of people, organizations, locations, products, or things, if you will. So really kind of asking ourselves and looking, so what are you mastering today in MDM? So what are the data domains that you have defined and are mastering actively today within your MDM practice? Let's take an inventory of those, make sure we understand the implications of that, and record some of the definitions in and around those data domains and constraints. And then it's taking a look similarly, right, about data domains that may already be defined throughout the organization through data governance, perhaps in a data dictionary. If you don't have a data dictionary, um, we've got samples where we can create one. It's a great opportunity then for you to build one with reference data management in your Reltio solution, and mature your data governance practice a little bit more by creating a data dictionary. But looking to that and making sure we understand where the gaps are, where there's alignment, and where there are opportunities. So kind of a SWOT analysis really around how you have data domains defined today. And these are critical because when we start to align these logical teams that will be responsible for executing data governance, they align to these data domains, right? So we still have that perspective aligning governance to data domains. We just do it in a little bit of a different manner. And then
It would be interested, Chris, to know like if folks can put this in the chat, what data domains are you currently mastering? I mean, it's always a helpful thing for us to know, and even from a connecting peers to each other, so feel free to push that into the comments. Would love to know.
Good call, Chris.
Anyways, go ahead.
Little tip here, just from my experience, any opportunity that you have to understand ways that you can increase adoption and increase the value of your master data management practice for your organization is good to pay attention to. So as you do this analysis, where you see domains that are defined to the organization, but maybe not mastered through your MDM practice yet, figure out how you get those on your roadmap. Put them on the roadmap. Start having conversations about those domains and what it would mean to master those domains. Probably haven't had the conversations yet in some cases. So very good conversations to have. It puts people's minds on what MDM can do for them and can help you expand that adoption of your MDM practice and add a lot of value to your organization and achieve some of the vision and goals that you have for your MDM practice.
So right now, some of the comments, hopefully we have a little bit more, but location, contact site, account, members, and prospects from healthcare and insurance. Keep it coming. Thanks.
Keep it coming. Again, data domains, the ways that we understand these kind of base level nouns of people, organizations, and locations based on the business entities that are important to our organizations. Next, we dive into data products here. So this one we'll probably spend a little bit more time on just to get some alignment. And I think a good way to look at kind of data products is a term that's being bandied about quite a bit right now with the popularity of data mesh, data fabric coming on in the last couple of years or so. But simply here, just to kind of put it in very simple supply chain type terms, in this case, a data supply chain, we understand data producers, data consumers, and even what we call data suppliers. So if we look at it through the lens of more of like a global supply chain and manufacturing lens, it makes the data product concept just a little bit easier to understand, because if you go out there and you Google things, it can be quite nebulous. There are a lot of sites that just say basically anything can be a data product. And when we're trying to create structures and organization around these, that type of vagueness is less than helpful and tends to create more confusion. So we look at it from the perspective of this more of a really a manufacturing type of supply chain for producers and suppliers and things like that. But the key here, and we've talked about this before in previous ones about, growing your MDM practice, was a webinar that we did, and we used the term, follow the data, follow the data. What that means is really look at your MDM practice and start there. Your starting point is your hub. Understand what you consume. So what are your data sources? And think of those data sources as actual data products. What is the data set that you're getting from source system A, B, C, D, whichever you have? And each one of those is really a fit for purpose data product. It's fit for your purpose to consume, to master the data, right? So that's a great way to kind of understand product at that level, and product from the consumption, right? Because now MDM is a consumer, a data product consumer, consuming data products from source systems, right? Walk that back a little bit and understand, so for each one of those source data products, if we want to call them that, who owns that? Like, who's the person that's ultimately responsible for the creation and curation of that data set coming into MDM, right? As people like to say sometimes, who's the throat to choke, right? If you're not getting your data, or if the data is inaccurate coming into your MDM hub, those type of things. Who is that individual? And those are the folks that we would consider kind of data product owners, right? They have a responsibility for a very specific data product to be generated with quality, on time, right? All those aspects. And they create that as really a consumable good, and you're the consumer of that good. Another way to look at it now is from an outbound perspective. So we talked about understanding data products from the inside, really starting to map to the data products to get through to the data owners on the other side of that and build out that landscape. You do the same thing with the outbound or with the downstream folks. So who's consuming the MDM data? And what does that look like? What are the data products that people are consuming from you, the MDM owner, which makes you as well a data product owner, right? So you're producing that data product, and you own that. It's very common to have this, right? So I'll point to the note at the bottom. A lot of times, and this is kind of what lends to the vagueness in the definitions of data products that are out there right now. A lot of times when you're a consumer of data products, you're also a producer of a data product, right? So you may be consuming a data product that is fit for your purpose to go and generate another data product that supports, a business function or a business process. Very, very common. So it's really contextually specific as to which role you're in at that point. And you can be both a data producer and a data consumer and be the same physical individual. When we talk about that consumption, again, walk it back to, okay, so who's owning the consumption of that? Who's consuming your data to do something with it, right? And these would be your data product consumers. So this starts to build out some of the landscape of really roles that will be assigned that are data governance specific roles. And this is how you can draw that map of all these data constituents, right, through the concept of data products. So what does that look like? So this is a version of a flat version, not a lot of detail in it, right, of Reltio and what we're moving forward with here. These represent your data product owners, right? And so you see the data domain across the top. The data product teams are really these logical teams that are responsible for the creation and curation of a given data product. So the team that is building source system A extract for you in MDM is a data product team. And there are people responsible for creating and managing that data product that's going to you in MDM. Now, we use the term logical because sometimes these teams, these data product teams, have members of different physical functional teams on them. Depends on your organization. Not every organization is the same. So that's why we list that there is more of a logical separation. A lot of the times you will have a functional area or a functional team that is solely responsible for one to many data products, and you would see kind of the same folks, if you will, for those multiple data products. But we still focus on those not from the functional perspective, but from this logical data product team type perspective when it comes to governance. The domain delegate is key to understand here. Domain delegates are really subject matter experts. Most of the time, they're usually kind of the data product owner, right? Because the person who's leading the team, right, and has ultimate responsibility for the data being produced by that data product team. But sometimes, you've got folks that are, super SMEs, if you will, in and around the data that they're using and consuming to produce within those functional teams. And it's okay for that domain delegate role to be assigned outside of the product owner by the product owner, but by default, we'll get to that a little bit, it's usually the data product owner. So these are the data product teams that roll up under specific data domains, right? Where you would see kind of customer centric, maybe your customer 360 domain, and the teams that are creating data products that are customer centric would roll up under those data domains. Okay. And then the domain collective is really another logical grouping, right? And this is kind of your data governance council. It's just using a different terminology to help get away from legacy data governance aspects when some of those legacy data governance teams or practices really were viewed a little too heavy-handed and didn't lend themselves to operating very effectively within the organization. So just a little softer language, to be honest with you, around that, to not evoke some of the emotions maybe that are attached to legacy data governance. But the domain collective being really kind of a cross data product and sometimes cross-functional set of resources that decide on policies. They have decision rights on policies, standards, controls, things of that nature, all within a specific domain. So example would be if this is a customer domain, customer person domain, let's say, and each of these teams had data products that were customer person centric that they owned and managed. There'd be a team of people across those teams really that would collaborate and collectively decide and make those decisions around the customer person domain. Tying this back to how do we define these? So defining and understanding the unique data products is key that exists within that domain, right? And when we follow the data back out of MDM, right, and forward out of MDM, we're able to understand those data products like we just talked about a moment ago. And then we're able to understand who the data product teams are, who the data product owners are, and who kind of these individuals are. And we can start to map this type of picture out for the organization. But what does it look like kind of from a nuts and bolts role and accountability? Basically when we see the domain collectives, the big thing here is that they have eyes on setting controls, declaring what is best practice and standards, defining policy, right? Defining a roadmap for the domain, right? And then, mitigating or remediating any kind of stewardship issues or constraints or other decisions from data users, data consumers, things like that may have been brought up. Key aspects of this are making sure too that we have some operational metrics and KPIs around data governance, right? So the domain collective is really responsible for that given domain. Quick look at the domain delegate badge. So the domain delegates, the members of the domain collective, right? Really from within their own data products, data product or data products, right? Most of these are owners or operators of specific data products, right? We talked about the ability to delegate from the data product owner when and where that makes sense, when SME is quite capable of doing that. They are accountable for stewardship of that data within their domain. So they're accountable for basically all the SLAs that you would want to have around data, that you want data governance to be holden to, right? The completeness, the accuracy, the availability, the security, right, of data. And we just boil it up into the domains. The domain delegates are the ones that are responsible for that. And then specifically around the data products that they own the creation of, right, that they are producers of, because they have a lot of control there, right? So it's using that control and giving them the decision rights, right, to operate and do something about having that control. Any questions on those? Those are kind of the big ones here, really around how we walk back to define, these logical teams and how they operate, and explains how this supports a more federated approach rather than kind of the legacy approach of just having kind of a customer domain council that is a hard assignment, right? Reports up to a much more structured governance and policy framework within the organization.
I don't see any questions on the chat, but if somebody wants to chime in, if there's any questions. Nope.
All right. So next step would be, all right, so we know what the domains are. We know the products within those domains and the people that support those products. And we've built some teams to own and manage the data within that domain and the decisions around the data within that domain based on their product ownership, their data product ownership. Now we're going to look to understand, policies and standards. So again, this is really kind of a gap and SWOT analysis. It's what's in place today. If you have data governance, what are the policies that are in place? Typically we see policies set more around data access, right? Least minimum. Anything that is related to meeting and being compliant with mandates, whether they be business level mandates, industry level mandates, or federal and governmental mandates. Most of the data policies, we see least minimum folks have those, right? And those tend to exist at more of an IT or even a corporate policy, organizational policy level. The data policies we talk about here are really very data centric, right? And roll into the data governance practice, right? And not into kind of corporate policy. But it's important to look at from your data governance practice, if you have one, what's defined already, kind of understand that thoroughly, and then compare that possibly to some of the business logic you have in place in areas of your MDM practice where you can help activate some of those. So if they've got standards around, data attribute format or standardization of data attribute values, just valid data, right? What makes data valid or invalid? And then obviously like the cleanse routines and things like that, where you want to use the best possible information and align your data to that information. All of those are really rooted and centered in business logic that defines how the business, right, needs to see that data to fit their purpose, right? So looking at what is defined from those perspectives, as far as standards are, what's in place, what's defined by data governance today, which of those are you able to enact, right, through data quality and validation type of capabilities in your MDM practice, right? So do a quick little gap analysis of that. Usually do these document these at the domain level, because it's responsibility then of the DG practice, and it would be the domain collective working with the MDM team, right, to prioritize any of these gaps that are seen and to help work with you and your business partners, right, through the domain collective for any funding or anything needed to really execute to remove those gaps. What's important to know is that, kind of the difference, because sometimes we can see that terms like policy and standards get conflated. There isn't, clarity in the differentiation between the two. And I think just a simple way to look at it, this might not hold true for everyone everywhere, right? But just more simply, the policies are really, these rules that govern the things we want to impact in data governance: availability, integrity, use, security. But the key here is that it's a rule. There's no exceptions, right? So generally you'll see policy written really at that level, and policies tend to steer people towards a set of standards and tell people you need to abide by the standards, right? Whereas data standards are really, these are the ways we want to practice. Here's some guidelines, right? Here's ways that we can ensure that we are compliant to our own kind of availability, integrity, and security of the data, right? You'll see data standards usually, because they're practice oriented, they will tie, usually pretty directly to ways that we use data for data management, ways that our customers, our business partners within the organization enter that data, right? So things of that nature that help prevent bad data from getting created, or security issues, making sure people have the right least minimum access to data, things like that. And of course, usually with standards, there can be exceptions that are granted. There are business reasons sometimes why you can't follow the rule 100% of the time, right? So usually with that perspective, policies are much more strict. Data standards, we're allowed to record some exceptions for those. It's usually a good way to look at it. But another tip here in this one you'll see is it's kind of common across the board. When you look at your MDM practice, a lot of times it's hard to actually go do this work. It's not that we don't want to do it. It's that we don't have budget for it, right? Operationally, we're a little tied to break fix, to keeping the lights on, to a very base minimal budget to do those type of things. But it's highly important that we're actually activating data governance. It should be considered mission critical. So when you're working through these and you're identifying some of these gaps, again, you're going to be working with the domain collective. You're working through them with other business constituents and partners. This is where we can start to put a business case together for increasing operational budgets for your MDM practice, right? Highly recommended. You want to cover the cost to be able to do this work. You want to stay aligned to policies and standards as they evolve. You don't want to wait for a project to come down the line that's going to pay for that and kind of tack that onto a project. Make sure it's understood the value that MDM brings to activating data governance, and that that's put into some budgets so that you can continuously do that through the life cycle of your MDM practice.
So Chris, we have a comment by Terry, so appreciate the comment, Terry. He said, I like your definition of data policy and data standards. The distinctions are really important and worth highlighting. So
thank you.
Some feedback there.
Next, this is going to sound a little similar, so hate to be redundant, but we want to do the same thing around the stewardship processes, right? Let's understand what's out there. What are the expectations? What are our data stewards doing today? What's the process around that? And I'm one of these folks. Even though I do come from a development background, I do like process, right? So not everybody in IT likes process. It's a bad word. It's almost a 4-letter word to some people, and I get that. But processes are processes when they're documented and defined, right? And they really lend well to cross-functional execution within an organization, because it maps out the roles and responsibilities and expectations we should have of one another quite well. So understanding the data stewardship processes, how are data stewards doing their job? How are they remediating data quality issues, right? What do they do? understanding that and what's in place today. And then again, doing kind of a gap analysis of, well, what does MDM do? Like, what are our data stewards, processing in MDM? Are they using the workflows out of Reltio from that perspective that allow them to, have well-defined processes and flow and decision criteria and those things, right? That all come from, having documented process. So what are the gaps there, right? And again, we want to make sure that data stewards, right? The goal here is data stewards have and are enabled and empowered to do their job, right? So what do they need to do that? You can only know that if you have a defined process. And then we can take a look at how can we, automate some of that? How can we help them manage that in a more consistent way through workflows in MDM, right? And again, prioritize efforts with the domain collectives that you'll be a part of, because you're in MDM and you will be part of those domain collectives. And then, getting an audience with some business partners that are within those domain collectives as well, to talk about how we resolve those gaps in process, right? It's important, some of the important things that don't often get put in place because there's not a lot of real process in place to hold people accountable to such things, are remediation SLAs. This is one of the biggest, I think, constraints I've seen in my time in and around data management and data governance is, clear ownership of DQ remediation, right? And what the time frame looks on that, like that. What are the expectations? Making sure that data governance, creates those SLAs in and around the data stewardship processes is absolutely key. In order to properly enable, right, and empower data stewards, we really need well-defined and documented decision criteria, right? So what can they use, and what is the process that they're going to go through to, say, approve or not approve data change request, or, approve or not approve change to an attribute definition, those type of things. Making sure we have it documented really allows us to have a consistent view of it. If we can have a consistent view of decision criteria within the domain collectives, we can spread that across the organization. We can have a collective view of a single view of what makes data good and what makes data bad, right? And then lastly, key is really making sure people are enabled and empowered, right? Especially data stewards. Oftentimes, data stewards aren't all that empowered, right? So through the domain collectives, through federated data governance, we can help give them a voice. We can help them feel empowered enough to make the decisions around data that we want them to make when they're actively stewarding the data. Pro tip on this one, pretty much same as before, right? It costs money. It's hours, it's resource time, it's prioritization of, this break fix over, augmenting or creating a new workflow for data stewardship. So getting that on the roadmap, getting funding for it, having conversations about, managing and maintaining data stewardship workflows within MDM being part of your MDM practice, and requiring the funding to do that, to keep those created and curated over time is critical. And then it's going to sound like I'm beating a drum. I know we're coming up on time here, Chris, but this one's very similar. Do the same thing. Do the gap analysis with what operational metrics are you creating in MDM, right? And it's important things that oftentimes we don't get to until further down the road, because many of us have been, brought into a project. We've created this master data management thing, and now we're live, and now we're at a point where we're figuring it out. How do we actually operate, right? I've got a solution in place, but I don't quite have a practice yet, right? So one of those key steps that we've talked about before, and the MDM practice maturity, is really around making sure that we're watching things, we're monitoring MDM, we have operational metrics that help us make decisions, right? We understand what our deduplication rate is, right? We understand what our rate of false positive or potentially false negative matches will be, right? All of these type of things that can help speak to the effectiveness of master data management practice should be surfaced, should be integrated with data governance KPI reporting. So take a look at what's being reported to understand the effectiveness of data governance. See where you can augment that through MDM, right? See where you can add. You can be additive and add value to that understanding of total data quality and other views that you can give to the data governance folks and other insights. Again, as with the others, whichever gaps come up in this that you're seeing that require work, may need to get some funding for that. So it's again, having that audience through the domain collectives that are both business and IT people and focused on what you're focused on helps you to establish some of those relationships where you can get a business case put together and get funding to go do that work, as well as making sure that it stays part of your kind of keep the lights on operational budget for your MDM practice. But one of the keys, because what we tend to see sometimes is an over proliferation of metrics, right? And sometimes metrics just alone don't really tell the story. So key things to focus on are making sure that we're aligned with the domain collective on the metrics that we have, and that we've defined them and we've documented those definitions. We've documented the process for obtaining those metrics. We need to have consistent and constant monitoring, right? So that goes with obtaining those metrics, kind of, right? So what is in place so that you can actually go get? Like, what are we watching? What do you need to be able to have that level of monitoring to obtain critical metrics? And then lastly, it's really about turning those metrics into an insight, right? What do those metrics say? And being able to easily understand that from a consumer side, right? And then also the ability to access that, right? Having regular access to those metrics is extremely key as well, and something to pay attention to. Again, metrics can be great data points, but they don't always tell a story. So make sure you're telling a story with the metrics that you collect, and you're providing insights to help influence the organization through data governance and through master data management. So before I hit the recap, real quick call for any questions, any insights folks have.
No questions in the chat.
Right.
Kind of a quiet group today.
Yeah. It's pouring here. Hopefully it's not too loud over there.
Can't hear it.
Okay. So to recap, we talked about some of the synergies between MDM and data governance, really about how there's a lot of parallel evolution that occurs through there, right? And we can grow one while growing the other. One can help activate the other, right? Those kind of things. And how their structures, right, are even quite similar. How the federated aspects of data governance that we want to achieve are really there, and they're part of kind of the construct and the makeup of how we see MDM, right? We talked about the overall a data governance framework, the pillars for that framework that really hold and make the practice operable and executable. And we kind of talked about some of the steps associated with those framework pieces, where we can take the MDM lens that we have and look through that to the data governance framework and really start to help build out this federated governance execution framework, right? From an MDM perspective. We've talked through the several steps in that, right, of making sure that we're understanding data products. We can look through the lens of MDM for sources and consumers to do that. And we associate those products to who owns them and who's influential in the creation and management of those data products, and making sure that we build domain-centric teams from those people, right? And hold them accountable to the goals of data governance. We gave you some hints and tips around making sure that we include that, right? And we can also continue to fund MDM and some initiatives around your MDM practice to stay on top of activating data governance, right? And being able to make the most out of your MDM practice, but really bolster data governance and make data governance a positively impactful thing for your organization. And you can do that through MDM. And really, there's out of all of the data management aspects, MDM is really one that can do that better than most, because you see the core data, the most important data for the organization, and you can impact that, right? And you see it all, and you have access to it all, and you have connections, right, to those federated data owners and data product owners and all the important data stakeholders within that sphere. You can understand them because you have the data and you know where it's coming from and where it goes, right? So you have a very, very valuable point in the organization of which to be effective. And with that, I'll end it. I'll encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or you'd like to talk a little bit more about making this actionable and doing this, or if you have feedback. So a call to action for each of you is reach out if you want to learn more. Tell us what you want to know. Chris is always dying to have more and more community shows where we can give great information to you all. And I'm dying to know how you feel about data governance, what some of your challenges are. Were there pieces that you felt we kind of missed here, or things that you want to dive into a little bit more? Give me a shout at chris.iloff@reltio.com or follow up with Chris Detzel, and I'm happy to have those conversations. But please keep the feedback coming and tell us what you want to know.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for coming. Please take the survey at the end whenever it pops up. That will also help kind of guide us in future shows with Chris. And yeah, this is being recorded, or it's going to be posted in the next couple of days. I'll also have the PowerPoint with the follow up. So let us know if you have any questions. Certainly appreciate everyone coming today, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great stuff, Chris. It's kind of a thought leadership, and it's a lot to take in, but I think it's really good content. So
thank you.
All right, I'm out. Thanks, Chris.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.